We have these things that were so one-dimensional. I mean, they were instruments of violence. And to be able to recraft them into these objects that suddenly are capable of producing the most beautiful and amazing sounds. It's an artwork that really does walk a tightrope. I'm standing here in one of my very favourite rooms at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, the Transit Room. And I'm really excited today to be sharing with you 5 sculptures that I haven't seen since 2016. They're 5 works by the Mexican artist Pedro Reyes that are stored here in these boxes. Pedro Reyes is an artist based in Mexico City, and he's an incredibly fascinating artist whose artworks take so many different forms. He's probably most comfortable, though, to describe himself as a sculptor. And I think one of the reasons for that is that Pedro didn't study visual art, he actually studied architecture. And he once commented that architecture for him is a discipline that's about solving problems. And in a sense, that's what he tries to do with his artwork. He'll often identify what he sees as social problems. And then he attempts to devise these imaginative and poetic solutions to these social problems. This particular body of work, which is called Disarm, was acquired by the gallery in 2015, and it has a really fascinating backstory. In 2012, the city of Juarez contacted Pedro Reyes and invited him to produce an artwork. They had seized around 6,000 weapons in conflicts with the Juarez drug cartel in the city. And they invited Pedro to think about a creative way of working with this stockpile of weapons. And from that invitation, Disarm was born. Pedro worked with a group of musicians and audio engineers, and together they methodically disarmed the weapons. They broke them down into their constituent parts to transform the weapons into musical instruments. So we have 5 examples from that series here, 5 different instruments that function as sculptures. They can be displayed on plinths as a gallery, and we can appreciate them as examples of assemblage, where we have different industrial materials brought together in the manner of a collage. But they're also designed to be played. So each of them is very carefully constructed to be able to actually produce sound, from the rain stick to the xylophone, where we have a series of barrels of rifles. We have pistols supporting the base of the xylophone. We even have pistol hammers. And if we look at the end of the mallets, the hammers are actually the hammers from pistols. So we can imagine these, or we can see them here at the end of these pistols. We have a double psaltery, which is a kind of zither or harp. And as we can see here, every element has been constructed so that it can actually be performed and produce sound. We have bridges, we have pickups, we have volume and tone knobs that have been crafted out of sections of a cassette that would hold bullets in a pistol. We have tuning knobs. We have a set of panpipes. And I think one of the other fascinating things about them, when you see them in the galleries, you really have a sense of what they'd be like to hold. And they're heavy. They're literally made from the metal from firearms. And of course we have the guitar. We have pistols here that are leading down to the bridge, holding the strings together. Magazines that look like they probably came from automatic rifles, with cartridges used as volume and tone knobs, all of which are functional. So as we can see, there's a pickup here, and it's wired through to a jack which can connect to an amplifier. When I first saw Disarm exhibited, it was at the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh in the United States. And I thought at the time how the way that audiences respond to objects like this that so clearly include parts of firearms in them is just so different to the way that they'd be read here in Australia. And then years later, when we actually acquired these sculptures for the collection, one of the fascinating things that came about is that when we went to import them into the country, it became clear that we actually needed to obtain a firearms license to be able to bring them into the gallery. But you can see, if you look at the details of them, the way that the weapons have been, quite methodically rendered useless by routing out different parts of the barrels, removing certain of the mechanical elements, but repurposing them in so many different ways. So last time I saw these objects was back in the summer of 2015, 2016. They were actually included in an exhibition here. It was very soon after we acquired them. It was a show put together by Cara Pinchbeck, who's our curator of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island art. The show was called When Silence Falls. An amazing show. It brought together so many different areas of the gallery's collection. And during the day, the sculptures were exhibited in a very conventional way. They were shown on white plinths, on shelves on the wall, and people encountered them as you would normally encounter a sculpture in a gallery setting. But for several nights of the exhibition, something really magical happened with the objects. We invited the composer Stu Hunter, who assembled a group of musicians that came into the exhibition space. The objects came off their plinths, off their shelves, and onto the laps of the musicians who performed them in front of a live audience. So when we see them performed, they take on an altogether different life. Music, of course, is something that is all about bringing people together to share in an experience. It's also an art form that's able to express so many different emotional states. So we have these things that were so one-dimensional. They were instruments of violence. And to be able to recraft them into these objects that suddenly are capable of producing the most beautiful and amazing sounds. It's an artwork that really does walk a tightrope. And I think the artist wants us to focus on that fine line. And for him, there's the possibility always that an object like this can act as an agent for change.